Y'all, I hope you are ready for a backhand of supreme implications. Because if you missed what was happening at the SCOTUS yesterday, the Supreme Court of the United States, you missed some amazing action all around if President Trump can actually fire people under the executive branch. Watching this lefty lawyer argue the point that he can't was like watching a sports game between an A-list team and a C-list team. It wasn't even close. I'm going to walk you through everything that you need to know, along with some other things that kind of add a little bit different color to this and why this is so important. Y'all, we're about to walk through some stuff, so hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn the notification bell on. Everything will be linked in the description box below for the furthering of your knowledge and checking me on what I'm telling you. Let's dive right in. You can, of course, follow me on on X at BradenLOA. Listen, here's the thing. High level, I don't want to get too in the weeds because a lot of these court cases can get really in the weeds, but I'm trying to tell you at a macro level, 35,000 foot view, what's happening for you and your rights in your country, okay? The left says President Trump can't fire people in the executive branch. He can't do it. Basically, they're arguing for the bureaucratic state to be immune from the power of the presidency because the deep state bureaucratic levers of power is how they have run Washington for the last 30 years, okay? There's a few high-level points that you need to understand going into this. You've got to understand the concept of Chevron deference. You have to understand, my 2A people will hear that one and go like, bing! You got to understand the idea of presidential power, and you have to understand of how they actually run the system in D.C. Because the way the politicians have done it for the last 20, 30 years is in Congress, you get voted in or out based off of hard votes. Well, we don't want that because we want to maintain our own power and stay in power. So we're going to pass laws that are very ambiguous, very non-descriptive, leave everything in between the lines, up for interpretation, because then we can't get kicked out of power. After all, we'll kick it over to the bureaucracy and they'll use something called Chevron deference, which means they'll just fill in the gaps of what they thought our intent was. Therefore, we get to keep our jobs, the bureaucratic state grows and never leaves and metastasizes into this monster of the swamp, and therefore everybody's happy. Except the American people. And this is what SCOTUS is talking on. And I'm going to hit all this here in a second. Bear with me. All right, first person up. Justice Gorsuch. I really like me some Gorsuch. He has a for the people streak, a batting down bureaucracy streak. I really like this about him. And he was pivotal in this case right here, which is called Loper Enterprises versus Raimondo, and it struck down Chevron deference. More on that in a second. Again, my 2A people will be like, I know all about that. Okay? Let's get it. Listen to some of this and listen to the smarmy little lawyer trying to avoid what the justice is asking.
I just want to explore, just for a brief minute, I hope, your scintilla of conclusive and preclusive power theory. You agree, I assume, the president is vested with all the executive power.
Yes.
You agree that he has a duty to faithfully execute all the laws?
Yes.
Civil and criminal?
We agree that the Constitution imposes on the president a duty to faithfully execute the laws.
All
absolutely.
the laws?
Well,
some laws he doesn't have to? That'd be news to our friends across the street.
The take care clause is a duty, and it is also a power, but the text of the clause does not provide that the president must have at-will presidential...
I didn't ask that. This is, does he have a duty to faithfully execute all the laws?
We know from...
Yes or no?
I would say no in the sense...
No.
In the sense that, there's two different questions, and I want to make sure that I'm answering.
Okay, so you have to understand smarmy liberal leftist thinking on this one, and this is literally the most manipulative way you could possibly answer the question. Very simple question. Does the president have an obligation to fulfill and execute all the laws passed by Congress per our Constitution? The answer, by the way, is yes, he does. This whole presidential choice and presidential deference that they have done through the left and the right, where they go, well, yeah, that's the law, but I'm not going to enforce it because that's my option. It's my privilege to decide if I'm going to enforce the laws or not, i.e. the border, Biden. Many, many examples, but that's the most recent one, okay? What he's doing is saying, like, well, of course, he's got a duty to enforce all the laws, so he has to enforce all of them. Well, I don't know about that. That's the whole point. And I'm going to go big on this one for you real quick. You have to understand this. The reason that this little twerp won't go down the road of saying, yes, the president has an executive responsibility in the Constitution to fulfill all the laws that Congress passes, is because that is a tool that the left uses consistently all the time because they choose which laws to enforce and which ones not to. Again, the border is an example. This whole deference idea, this whole privilege of I will choose what I want to do because I'm the executive. It's very similar to the piece that I introduced earlier. Now, this is Chevron deference, okay? Chevron deference, I'm going to read this for you real quick. This died in 2024. Again, all my 2A crowd, all the 2A warriors out in my audience know this was a landmark decision for us across the board in the United States because it took away the interpretation power of bureaucracies. Watch. Chevron deference was a legal doctrine requiring courts to defer to a federal agency's reasonable interpretation of an ambiguous statute it administers. Again, remember, Congress passes ambiguous statutes on purpose. The Supreme Court overturned this doctrine in June 2024, holding that courts must now find their own interpretation of ambiguous laws rather than deferring to an agency's interpretation. This means federal courts will decide the meaning of ambiguous statutes for themselves rather than automatically upholding a reasonable agency interpretation. This is everything about this. And again, I've got clips on clips on clips on this. But you have to understand, Loper Enterprises, the Supreme Court case that I've linked and I showed you, is what killed Chevron deference. Okay, that was a massive move. The reason why it's so massive is because reasonable agency interpretation are things like the IRS, are things like the ATF, are things like the FBI. All these executive bureaucracies that serve at the pleasure of the president, all of them are using this concept of Chevron deference to make up laws as they see fit. A really good example is another case that was not Loper Enterprises, which was about herring fishermen. There was one with the CDC that the left, these executive bureaucracies, were trying to interpret carbon dioxide as a poison, as a toxin, as a pollutant, from a standpoint of redefining a term, okay? This was the whole idea. They were using their interpretation to change definitions in order to enact more regulations. That's the whole point. They lost that one too, by the way, because they were just trying to do this thing where they redefine everything. But that's the whole point. It's all about reasonable interpretation. No, it's about their power. That's why the dude wouldn't answer the question. All right, let's keep on going. This is Ketanji Brown Jackson. Listen to what her wisdom brings forward. Something about no kings and her just being her. Watch this.
Some issues, some matters, some areas should be handled in this way by nonpartisan experts. That Congress is saying that expertise matters with respect to aspects of the economy and transportation and the various independent agencies that we have. So having a president come in and fire all the scientists and the doctors and the economists and the PhDs and replacing them with loyalists and people who don't know anything is actually not in the best interest of the citizens of the United States. These issues should not be in presidential control. So can you speak to me about the danger of allowing, in these various areas, the president to actually control the Transportation Board and potentially the Federal Reserve and all these other independent agencies?
All right. First of all, the Federal Reserve is a separate thing. It is not a bureaucracy. The creature from Jekyll Island, you can read all about that. That thing is private. Anyway, let's keep on going. I don't want to open that quagmire at this second. You have to understand what she's saying. She's presenting the liberal side of this, okay? So the executive president, the head of the executive branch, the elected president, who reflects the will of the people, can't control independent bureaucracies. So your standing decision here, and your whole point is that the bureaucracies should just be maintained outside of voter control when the entire purpose of our system of government was to represent the will of the people, which is why we have elections every 2 years. So again, this is the important piece. They don't want you to have control. They want experts to have the control. Experts that live in the bureaucracy that can consistently and continue to provide for its own bureaucracy. That's the point. We can't elect these people. They aren't accountable to voters. They're just appointed, and they stay in the background working in the swamp like an underwater creature, like an alligator or an anaconda, just sitting there waiting for prey to walk by, and then they can pounce. It leads to a bloated government. It leads to an insane amount of spending, and it leads to a lot of corruption. It's not hard. There's a reason. The bureaucratic state is the symptom of an underlying laziness, but it is the thing that has to go away. Let's apply some Advil to this and get out of here. Okay, let's keep on going. We got one more thing for you.
And agencies are not accountable to the people. They're not elected, as Congress and the President are, and are exercising massive power over individual liberty and billion-dollar industries, whether it's the FCC or the FTC or whatever.
Thoughts on Kavanaugh's words, Jonathan?
Well, both Kavanaugh and Alito really made short work of those defending this law. They kept on presenting hypotheticals, what they called hard hypotheticals, of where does this take you? Both of them said, well, can you just go ahead and make any cabinet department an independent commission? Can you specify just one commissioner? Can you make their length in office 20 years? All of those questions left the other side floundering. The best that they could say at points was, well, if something like that happens, you could come back and look at it. Well, the justices are looking at it now. And one of the things that should be on.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I don't care about his analysis on that point because, I mean, it is a valid point, but I want to hit this part right here. I'm just going to zoom in real quick. This is really important. Independent agencies are not accountable to the people. They're not elected as Congress, and the president are exercising massive power over individual liberty and billion-dollar industries, whether it's the FCC or the FTC. Y'all, that's it. I think they're going to strike this down. Honestly, I'd be here for it too. But you have to understand what's happening. Across the board, the executive bureaucracies and the deep state are losing power. The SCOTUS has absolutely smacked the crap out of the bureaucratic state in the past 3 or 4 years. And I hope this one gets added to the pile. But what do you guys think? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll see you on the next one. I'm Braden. Later.